Hey, y'all, it's Lori and David again. Glad to be here. Wanted to share with you that I've been thinking about the videos that we are creating for Anthony with Pro Say Dad. And we're not always going to talk about court stuff. We're going to talk about all kind of stuff because if you're not in a blended relationship or are not planning to be in a blended relationship or haven't been in a blended relationship, you will probably fall into one of those three categories.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to help you to not go through the crap we went through.
Yep.
One of the things that we mentioned last time was parental alienation. And I want to talk about a few things with that. There are 5 things you do not want to do when you are the targeted person of parental alienation. You don't want to retaliate with alienation.
Right.
That's tit for tat.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing the same damage. Don't slander the other parent in front of the child or even in the presence of the child. When I say that, the kids in the house, they can hear things. So if the kids around, don't say anything negative about their parent.
Yeah. I mean, it's not going to help you.
Right.
I
And it's
mean,
not their fault that their parents this way.
right.
They shouldn't have to deal with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not going to help you any to do that. One thing that I think is good to keep in mind anytime you're going through a battle like this is what you're going to say or do going to help or hurt your situation?
And is it out of kindness and love?
Yeah.
Because even if it's against someone that's hurting you, the best way for you to respond is with kindness and love.
Yeah. So if you're slandering the other person, even if you feel like you're defending yourself, because oftentimes I think we quickly go from defending ourselves to attacking the other person because it's like, defend, jab, defend, jab. And that's kind of how we feel. But oftentimes it's just better to either defend and not jab, or if you have a legal way to defend, then just do that. So it's not a bunch of back and forth, but especially when you have other kids involved, just step back for a second. Is this going to help my situation out at all if I'm doing this? And maybe the answer is yes, maybe it's not. Is it going to hurt me or my situation at all if I do this? And oftentimes that's the key, because you can then say, well, yeah, it is probably not going to reflect well, on my kids, or they might think differently or whatever. And sometimes it's actually both. Like, it would help my case or it would help the situation, but it could also harm the situation. And then you got to figure out which one really is most important to you.
And I think when it comes down to that, it's what's best for the kid.
That was my point, is that there were definitely times where it would probably be beneficial for me to respond a certain way to their mom, but it would also potentially be more harmful for my kids because of whatever the topic or situation might have been. And so the love for my kids outweighed the dislike for my ex.
You took my phrase. But also, sometimes I think it's important to say, if I was my child and I was watching my parents or was hearing my dad or my mom or my stepmom or my stepdad talk about one or the other, how would that make me feel?
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of times as step parents and even bio parents, we forget how kids view things.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are the other person, so for instance, if I'm complaining about my ex, it's not good if David chimes in and says something about him.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, I can call my mama a bad word, but you can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, and sometimes your partner may even get defensive if you talk about their kid's bio mom because it's their kid's bio mom.
Yeah.
So be careful with that. Try to put yourself in different situations.
Well, even in discussing things where I was having a conversation with the ex and it was heated, oftentimes if you were kind of jumping on my bandwagon of, yeah, you need to do this and fight back and blah, blah, I think it put me in a situation where I felt obligated. I felt like I didn't have options at that point, even though you saw it as I'm backing you and all this. Because oftentimes 24 hours later, I've calmed down and I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to even address this. But you're like, what do you mean you're not going to address this? You know, you need to light into her. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and
But he
so,
knew it would do no good.
yeah.
Yeah. Don't react impulsively. This goes for even if you have an attorney. If you get an email from the ex that makes you mad, don't immediately send an email to your attorney about it because you haven't processed it. You haven't thought about it. And then you're going to have to either send another email to your attorney and another email because you couldn't put everything in there because you didn't take the time to deal with what was at hand. You got emotional and reacted instead of responded.
Right.
It's very important to learn to respond instead of react. And don't ignore legal and therapeutic assistance. What Anthony Cancel does with Pro Say Dad is awesome. Awesome. I don't know that I could have ever done it because I don't know if I could have disconnected emotionally because it was my son. But not saying that you're bad if you can. It's good if you can. Because you can categorize those things and you can represent yourself without falling victim to the emotions. Yeah. That sounded horrible, but you know what I'm saying. But there's all kind of stuff. Join some type of group, step family group, bio dad group, whatever, of support, not a Facebook group of venting, but you need somewhere that's a supportive group.
All right.
Not a venting chamber or an echo chamber or somebody that's going to validate inappropriate behavior or
Those get bad advice.
Yeah.
Oftentimes because they don't have to deal with consequences of any actions that you take.
Right.
And so we see that in many things inside and outside of step families.
Yeah. Be like, I'd shoot them.
Just anything. I mean, it's crazy what people will, they'll say. It's like, you don't have to deal with what I'm about to do. So if I do it wrong, you're like, oh, well, that's probably a bad idea. Should have done it.
Should have listened to me.
It's exactly what they'll say.
And don't give up on your kid. If you're experiencing parental alienation, and y'all, I'm going to tell you a story. There was this guy, David doesn't know a whole lot about this, so he's just going to sit here and look cute. There was this guy that I had as a guest on our podcast. He was so distraught. We've had several men and women on our podcast that are so distraught and overcome with the effects of parental alienation that they no longer want to exist. There was this guy that he's upset, and of course, rightfully so, hasn't seen his kids, feels like he's fighting in court, a losing battle. I told him about Anthony. Hopefully he'll get in touch with Anthony. But he's convinced that he is not going to win any time with his kids, and he can't financially continue to do this. And he thinks the best form of action is to physically punish the judge as his stance for parental alienation.
Mm.
And I said, wait a minute. You don't know how your kids are going to be in 6 months, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. And his comment to me was that he couldn't go 10, 15, 20 years to have that possibility that it may or may not happen.
Okay.
And that broke my heart.
That's somebody who has no hope.
He has no hope.
Mm.
And it upset me greatly. I get it.
Yeah.
And I'm getting goosey bumps. My sister went through this. It changed my sister from a hopeful individual to a completely brokenhearted, distraught, mentally and physically broken person. We've talked to several people on the podcast that have turned to drinking,
Mhm.
drugs. Some people have channeled it into good things, the energy, support groups for other people, turning into like athletic people,
Yeah, yeah, they go
focusing on
health,
health and
yeah,
stuff
yeah,
like
like, I
that.
get mad, so I go work out or whatever. Um,
So,
yeah, but you hit, I think, an area that is important, which is how you decide to respond to your circumstances is your choice. The circumstances may not be something you can choose, but how you respond to it is.
right. But I don't want it to sound like people that respond in a way that's not good is is bad, or that they're a bad or weak person, because that's not
No,
the case.
yeah,
This is
that's
horrible.
not what I'm implying, even though it may sound that way. What I am implying is that you have some control. What I think people often, when they feel hopeless, they feel like there is no control. They have no control. They have no other options.
Mhm.
And so their only option is that negative outcome. Whereas that's not always the case. In fact, it's probably never the case.
It's like they can't get up out of the funk.
Right. They don't see anything else.
Right.
So it's why you have to have somebody else come along, beside them and say that you can overcome this. There is some way out of this, or there is a better tomorrow than it is today. And
Mhm.
it might take a while to get there, but there is a better tomorrow than it is today. And it'll be different. It probably won't be the way you think it should be, but it'll be better than what it is.
I get that sometimes for your own mental well-being, you have to let that go,
Mhm.
but you're not giving up on your child. You're giving up on the fight. You're waving the flag. For me to be able to be alive, be healthy, and possibly be there one day for my kids,
Mhm.
I need to take care of myself.
Yeah. Otherwise, you'd rob your kids the opportunity should they ever had wanted to.
Right. But then some people will say, well, should I send them Christmas cards or birthday cards, because I want them to know I think about them and I love them. But if they don't want it, I don't want to send it and them, get angrier or whatever.
Mhm.
So you have to decide that.
Yep.
It has to be what you can find that peace with. If every time you send a card or a gift and you get nothing in return, and that sends you into a depressive spiral
Probably need
where
to stop.
you can't function, yes, you need to stop. That's a behavior that is not healthy for you.
Mhm. Yeah, and I might, if I were in that situation, I might actually send, like, let's just assume I've already sent a couple of cards and not got anything. I would probably send a third card with a letter saying, I am not gonna send any more of these, because I'm not getting a response from you, and I don't want to further damage our relationship by sending you things. If you ever decide you want to reach out, I am here for you. Something like that. So that you're putting it out there that it's not that I don't want to send you anymore. It's not that I'm forgetting about you, that I'm moving on with my life. It's none of those things. It's that because I don't want to damage this relationship, or I don't want to damage it any further, whatever the case might be. I am choosing not to do this, but I am
Mhm.
always here. So there, you left the door open. I'm always here. Should you want to pick up where we left off, or continue this conversation, or start or a relationship, whatever it is you have to say. And that way you haven't just sent cards and all of a sudden you stop and they're like, what,
Right.
what
Right.
happened?
And I also know that we've worked with people that they'll send monetary gifts
Hmm.
to the kids in form of a check. The check gets cashed, but there's nothing from the kids.
Yeah.
That person feels like they're still helping their kids. That's why they continue to do it. It
Yeah.
doesn't upset them when they see that check cashed
Hmm.
and no response. They see that check being cashed as my kid knows I'm here.
Yeah. Well, it comes to the question of if what you're doing or about to do, is it for you or is it for them?
Right.
Sometimes that helps you make that choice. Am I really doing it for them or am I doing it for me? And it doesn't mean you have to not do it or do it. It's just it puts some clarity into why you are taking that action.
Yep. All right. I think this is a good stopping place.
All right, cool. We're out.
All right. That was quick. I wasn't that ready to stop. So we will say that we have been fortunate enough to not have to experience parental alienation like so many of the cases we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
There was some,
Right.
but not to the extent of what we have seen. And we deeply feel for those that are dealing with that.
Yeah.
But you've got Anthony to help you learn how to represent yourself. This doesn't have to cost you a fortune. Do it right.
That's right.
All right. Until next time.
Yep. See y'all.